The year was 2027. Tensions simmered. NATO greenlit Operation Silent Aegis. Few knew its name, fewer still its true objective. The plan involved small deniable teams, elite specialists, their task to conduct subtle sabotage within Ukraine. Not against Ukrainians, but against Russian-backed separatist infrastructure. The official line was always support for Kyiv. This went deeper. It was a calculated poke, a test of the bear's patience, or perhaps an invitation. These units moved like phantoms, crossing unmarked borders in the dead of night. They targeted communication lines first, then minor logistical hubs. Nothing too overt, nothing that screamed NATO involvement directly. Plausible deniability was paramount. Each operative carried sterile equipment, no flags, no insignia, just the cold professionalism of their trade. They were ghosts in a land already haunted by conflict. Their actions were surgical, designed to appear as internal strife, or the work of local resistance cells. The intelligence authorizing these missions was classified, held at the highest echelons of the alliance. Even within NATO, debate had been fierce. Some warned of uncontrollable escalation. Others argued inaction was worse. The Hawks won. They always seemed to win when fear was the currency. The initial reports back were positive. Minimal resistance. Maximum plausible confusion sown. The targets were small, yet the strategic intent was enormous. A slow, steady pressure applied. The Kremlin watched. Its intelligence network, SVR and GRU, was not blind. They saw the patterns, the subtle shift in on-the-ground incidents. They noted the increased sophistication. The burn marks were there, if one knew where to look. 4 weeks, Moscow remained quiet. A dangerous, brooding silence. It was the calm before a storm they knew how to unleash. The ghost operation had pulled a silent trigger. The first shot in a war no one would admit to starting. Moscow's response was not immediate. It was calculated, deliberate, codenamed Iron Retort. It began not with tanks, but with whispers, and then with fire. A series of explosions rocked key Ukrainian government buildings, not in the contested east, but in Lviv, far to the west, close to the Polish border. The message was clear. Russia could reach anywhere. The attacks were sophisticated, using drones that were untraceable, or so it seemed initially. NATO intelligence scrambled. Was this the separatists? Unlikely. Their reach was limited, their methods cruder. Was it a direct Russian strike? The Kremlin issued swift denials. President Anton Volkov addressed the nation. He condemned the terrorist acts in Lviv. He blamed Ukrainian extremist factions he claimed seeking to drag Russia into a wider war. He offered condolences, and subtly he offered investigators, an offer Kyiv naturally refused. The game of mirrors had begun in earnest now. The West immediately pointed fingers at Moscow, a blatant act of aggression, declared the NATO Secretary General. Yet hard proof was elusive. The drone fragments were generic, the explosives, common types, the digital forensics a dead end, or worse, a hall of mirrors, leading back to servers in neutral countries, or even some whispered to servers seemingly within NATO's own sphere of influence. The waters were deliberately muddied, making any clear attribution a nightmare for analysts. Ordinary citizens were caught in the crossfire. In Lviv, fear mixed with anger. In Moscow, a sense of grim justification, fed by state media. The narrative was already splitting. Two versions of reality, hardening with each passing hour. Each side accused the other of provocation, of deception, of war crimes before a war was even declared. The initial NATO operation was a secret. Russia's retaliation was public, yet its authorship fiercely denied. Truth was the first casualty, burning brightly. The cycle of attack and denial accelerated. A NATO supply convoy in Poland, near the Ukrainian border, was hit. A precision strike. Casualties were reported. Warsaw screamed for Article 5. NATO convened emergency sessions. Russia again denied involvement. They presented satellite imagery, showing they claimed a tragic training accident by Polish forces. The images were grainy, open to interpretation, but they sowed doubt, especially among nations hesitant about direct confrontation. Political leaders faced an agonizing dilemma: act decisively and risk global war based on uncertain intelligence, or show restraint and appear weak, inviting further aggression. Public opinion was fractured. Online, a storm of conflicting information raged. Social media became a battleground. Sock puppet accounts, AI-generated talking heads, each pushed a tailored narrative, making it impossible for the average citizen to discern fact from fiction. Trust in institutions plummeted. Trust in news eroded daily. The President of the United States addressed his nation. His face grim, He spoke of shadowy aggressors. He condemned the web of disinformation. He promised a firm response, but stopped short of directly accusing the Russian state for the Polish attack. The intelligence was still being assessed. Behind the scenes, frantic calls between capitals, each leader trying to gauge the other's intent, their resolve, their access to the elusive singular truth of who did what. In Berlin, Chancellor Richter faced protests. Some demanded stronger action against Russia, others de-escalation and peace. His own coalition was divided. The foreign minister urged caution. The defense minister pushed for a significant show of force. Intelligence reports from the BND were contradictory. One suggested a GRU Special Forces unit, another a sophisticated third-party mercenary group. The truth felt like a ghost, always present, never graspable. Leaders were navigating in total darkness. The first overt, undeniable act of war was digital, not physical. It targeted the global financial system. The New York Stock Exchange flickered, then went dark. London followed, then Tokyo. A coordinated cyber attack of unprecedented scale. SWIFT, the international banking communication system, ground to a halt. Chaos erupted in trading rooms. Panic spread to the streets. ATMs ceased to function. Credit card transactions failed. The lifeblood of global commerce was choked. No one claimed responsibility. NATO cyber commands pointed to IP addresses originating in Russia and China. Moscow and Beijing issued joint statements condemning the reckless cyber terrorism. They suggested rogue actors, or even provocatively, a false flag operation by Western intelligence agencies, designed to justify military escalation. The digital fog was thicker than any smoke from a battlefield. It paralyzed decision-making. It amplified fear to a deafening roar across continents. Critical infrastructure became the next target. Power grids in Western Europe experienced rolling blackouts. Water treatment plants in the American Midwest reported system failures. Hospital networks were compromised. Patient data was scrambled. Surgeries were cancelled. This was warfare aimed not at armies, but at civilian populations, designed to cripple morale, to turn citizens against their governments. The attacks were insidious, hard to trace, easy to deny by their architects. The world watched aghast. The United Nations Security Council convened, but it was a hollow forum. Accusations flew. Vetoes were cast. The institution, designed to prevent such calamities, proved utterly impotent. Daily life for millions began to unravel. Supermarket shelves emptied, fuel became scarce. The intricate systems underpinning modern society were proving frighteningly fragile. The dominoes were falling, one by one, pushed by invisible hands in the digital ether. The cyber attacks were the prelude. The physical war followed, hesitantly at first. Small-scale border skirmishes erupted along the Russia-Baltic states frontier. Latvia reported incursions. Estonia claimed its airspace was violated. Lithuania declared a state of emergency. These were not full-scale invasions, more like probing attacks, honestly. Testing NATO's resolve. Testing Article 5's true meaning in a hybrid war. Each incident was met with denials from Moscow or counter-accusations of NATO provocation. Then came the nuclear scare. Russian strategic bombers were detected unusually close to Alaskan airspace. Interceptors scrambled. For a tense 30 minutes, the world held its breath. Was this it? The unthinkable. The bombers eventually turned back. Moscow called it a routine training exercise. The West called it nuclear blackmail, a dangerous escalation. The incident left nerves frayed and a chilling realization that the unthinkable was now terrifyingly possible, just a miscalculation away. Real battles began to unfold in unexpected theaters, beyond Ukraine, beyond the Eastern Europe. Proxy conflicts flared in the Middle East and in Africa. Nations already unstable became new chessboards for the great powers. Mercenary groups, their loyalties opaque, did much of the fighting and dying. Supplying weapons became a flood. Old alliances fractured. New, uneasy partnerships emerged. Turkey, a NATO member, adopted an increasingly neutral then eastward-leaning stance. India tried to mediate with little success. The conflict spread like a virus, not just geographically but into every domain of human interaction. Space became militarized, satellites were targeted, GPS systems became unreliable, naval confrontations occurred in the Arctic and the South China Sea. The rules-based international order was a phrase repeated often, usually as a eulogy. The ballet of brinkmanship was a deadly performance, each step carefully choreographed, but with the ever-present risk of a fatal misstep into the abyss of total war. The global economy, already reeling from the cyber onslaught, collapsed. Stock markets remained closed or experienced freefall when briefly reopened. International trade ceased. Supply chains, once intricate marvels of efficiency, were now broken threads. Ships lay idle in ports. Containers piled up. Businesses, small and large, went bankrupt overnight. Unemployment soared to levels not seen since the Great Depression. The invisible hand of the market was clenched into a fist, striking its own foundations. The United Nations became a ghost town. Diplomats were recalled. Resolutions were ignored. Peacekeeping missions, underfunded and unsupported, disintegrated. Humanitarian aid organizations struggled to cope. Refugee crises exploded on multiple continents. Famine, once a receding threat, returned with a vengeance as food production and distribution networks failed. The intricate web of global cooperation, built over decades, tore apart with terrifying speed, leaving only raw national self-interest. Daily life for ordinary people became a struggle for survival. In cities, electricity was intermittent. Clean water, a luxury. Access to medicine, a gamble. Rural communities fared slightly better initially, but soon they too felt the pinch as fuel for tractors disappeared and markets for their produce vanished. The veneer of civilization seemed perilously thin. Schools closed, public transport stopped. Fear and suspicion became constant companions. Neighbors eyed neighbors warily. The old certainties were gone. The belief in progress, in a stable future, replaced by a gnawing anxiety and a profound sense of betrayal. Governments seemed powerless, or worse, complicit in the chaos. The promises of security and prosperity made for generations lay in ruins. The foundations of the post-Cold War world had not just cracked. They had shattered into a million pieces, leaving humanity to pick through the rubble, wondering how it had all gone so wrong, so quickly. Information warfare reached its zenith, or perhaps its nadir. Deepfake technology became the weapon of choice, indistinguishable from reality. A video surfaced appearing to show the US president slurring his words, issuing confused, contradictory orders. It went viral before it could be debunked. Panic ensued. Another showed the Russian president announcing a full-scale nuclear mobilization. It too was fake. But for hours, global defense systems went to their highest alert. The psychological impact was devastating. No one knew what to believe. Every piece of footage, every audio recording, every official statement was potentially a fabrication. Soldiers on the front lines received conflicting orders from commanders whose voices and faces were flawlessly mimicked. Units hesitated, or worse, fired on friendly forces. Trust within military chains of command eroded. Paranoia became rampant. The enemy was not just in front, it was in the airwaves, in their very headsets. News organizations struggled to verify anything. Fact-checkers were overwhelmed. Each debunking was met with a fresh wave of fakes, more sophisticated, more insidious. Some deepfakes were designed not to be believed entirely, but simply to sow enough doubt, to muddy the waters, to paralyze any coherent response. The sheer volume was overwhelming, a fire hose of falsehood, drenching the world in uncertainty, making rational thought a casualty of digital war. Even personal communications became suspect. People received video calls from loved ones in distress, pleading for help or money, only to discover later they were interacting with an AI-generated fake, exploiting their deepest emotions. The social fabric, already strained, began to tear. If you couldn't trust your own eyes, your own ears, what was left? The deepfake deception turned every citizen into a potential victim and every screen into a potential weapon. The war for truth was comprehensively lost. Anna Kovalenko was a journalist in Kiev. She had seen war before, the Donbas conflict, the 2022 invasion. But this was different. This felt orchestrated, too slick, too many convenient coincidences. She worked for a small independent online outlet, one of the few still attempting genuine investigative journalism. Most others had succumbed to state propaganda or simply to despair. Anna clung to a stubborn belief that truth, however buried, still mattered. She had to find it. Her investigation began with the Lviv bombings. The official narrative never sat right with her, too neat, too quickly packaged. She cultivated sources, old contacts in the SBU, disgruntled officials, hacktivists operating in the digital shadows. One contact, codenamed Hermes, provided a data dump. Encrypted files allegedly from a compromised Russian military server. It took weeks to decrypt. What she found was perplexing. Orders, timetables, but also strangely redacted communications with an unknown third party. The trail then led her to an unexpected place, not east but west. Hermes hinted at parallel anomalies within leaked NATO intelligence chatter, mentions of controlled escalation, of scenario management, phrases that seemed out of place, coldly academic. Anna felt a chill. Could it be? Could both sides be playing a more complex game, one hidden from their own populations? She dug deeper into the financial transactions, the shell corporations, the middlemen who always profited from chaos and war. The evidence was fragmented, circumstantial, but it painted a disturbing picture, a pattern of synchronized provocations, of carefully managed crises. She found encrypted communications between entities supposedly on opposing sides, discussing outcome parameters and acceptable losses. It was unthinkable. Yet the data whispered its ugly truth. Anna sat in her dimly lit Kiev apartment, the drone of air raid sirens a familiar sound. She realized she was onto something far bigger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The pieces clicked into place. Not a clean, satisfying click, but a sickening lurch. The evidence Anna uncovered was dynamite. It suggested that certain powerful factions within both NATO countries and Russia had not stumbled into war, but had perhaps nudged each other towards it, covertly cooperating to achieve unstated parallel goals, goals that transcended national loyalties, goals centered on power, on profit, on reshaping the global order to their mutual hidden benefit. The ghost operation by NATO, Russia's iron retort, the escalating cyber attacks, the convenient failures of intelligence, the deepfakes that confused everyone. What if these were not just actions and reactions in a linear conflict? What if some were meticulously staged or deliberately allowed to succeed, to create the perfect storm of chaos, a storm from which new powers could emerge and old debts could be settled? The very idea was treasonous on a global scale. It was almost too monstrous to comprehend. Anna faced a terrible choice: publish and risk being branded a traitor, or worse, silenced permanently. By whom? That was the terrifying question. If her hypothesis was true, the enemy was everywhere and nowhere. Yet how could she stay silent? The war had cost millions of lives, shattered the world, all for a lie? For a manipulated, cynical game played by unseen puppeteers, pulling strings from the shadows, while ordinary people paid the ultimate price for their schemes. The moral question loomed. What did aggression truly mean if the aggressors were not clear-cut, if the lines between victim and perpetrator were deliberately blurred, if truth itself was a manufactured commodity? In such a world, how could peace ever be built? On what foundation? Anna knew her discovery would not end the war. It might even make it worse, unleashing a new wave of paranoia and witch hunts. But the truth, she believed, had a right to be known, even if it burned everything to ashes. Again.